Resourceful Designer, episode 250. Stop trying to convince clients to hire you.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He puts the pro in procrastination, Mark Descote.
Yep, it's just the way I am. I like to function under the pressure of a deadline. I know it's all in my head, but that's just how it is. I know it used to drive my manager crazy when I worked at the print shop, and I would wait until the last minute to start on any project. Oh well, the only person I have to answer to now is myself. Anyway, in this episode, I'm going to share a method that you should use when it comes to acquiring new clients. I'm also going to share a tip to speed up file acquisition. Now, what have I been up to this week? Well, I had something new this week, which was a lot of fun. A local business center in my area asked me if I would be what they call a digital consultant. Because of the COVID pandemic, a lot of small businesses are suffering, and our local business enterprise center received a government grant to help out these small businesses. And what they're doing is they're offering free consultation in different areas of business to these people from experts such as myself. So they asked me to be their digital consultant in regards to branding, design, marketing, and advertising. And this means that the client gets 1 free hour of consulting from me, and the Business Enterprise Center pays me for my time. So I had a lot of fun. I met with 2 clients this week, both of them asking questions on how they can market their business, both of them drastically affected by COVID. So we talked for an hour each and came up with some really good ideas. I know at the end of it, both ladies at the end said that they had taken pages of notes from some of the stuff I had told them, and they were really looking forward to implementing a lot of my ideas. So that was kind of fun. And the Business Enterprise Center said that there's going to be many more that they're going to be sending my way. It was something different, talking to a client, coming up with ideas, knowing that I'm not actually going to be working on the project with them. I mean, they have the option to hire me, but most of these people, the reason they're in this program is because they don't have the money for anything. So the chances of them hiring me are very slim. So I'm going into this very differently than I would normally, because normally whenever I'd be consulting with a client, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how am I going to accomplish all this stuff I'm suggesting? Well, in this case, I'm suggesting stuff that they should try that I wouldn't even be involved with. So that was a lot of fun. Now, of course, I also had some podcast artwork to do, as well as working on my presentation. Next week, I will be presenting at PodFest Summit. It's a virtual podcast conference, and I will be giving a talk on making sure your podcast website has everything it needs in order to help your podcast grow. Was working on those and practicing my presentation in anticipation of that, and I look forward to that. I love that sort of thing. Anyways, that's just a little bit of what I've been up to. Now, something else that I've been involved with is getting the Resourceful Designer community ready to open again. And the day that this episode drops, March 1st, the community is now open again for registration. Now, we had several new members join during the special month of February if they had signed up for the waiting list prior to my deadline. And we're now getting to know these new members that got early access, and we look forward to getting to know you. Now, it doesn't matter if you are a veteran design business owner or if you haven't even started your own design business yet. The community has something for you. But instead of me explaining it, why don't I let Gabe, one of the community members, share his experiences with the Resourceful Designer community?
I joined the Resourceful Designer community because the podcast itself has been such an inspiration to continue working toward one day being a full-time solopreneur. If the podcast was such a great resource, the community had to add another level to it. And I wasn't wrong. Being in the community is like living in a neighborhood where every neighbor has a tool you need and lets you borrow it with no hesitation. And no matter if you're Brian with a truck full of tools or me with the one lonely screwdriver, we can all contribute back. And that in itself is very satisfying. So bring your screwdrivers, your hammers, your wrenches, and especially your personalities. And let's continue to build up ourselves, each other, and this community together.
Well, thank you very much for that great testimonial about the Resourceful Designer community, Gabe. And I couldn't agree more. We are like a friendly neighborhood that just wants to help each other out. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, if you want to invest in your future by joining a community of ever helpful neighbors, as Gabe put it, then head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community and join today. And now this week's tip of the week. Now this is a tip I shared previously on the podcast, but it's worth sharing again. And I actually had to do this earlier this week. And this is finding a file. Specifically, it works really well for logos. Whenever the client just doesn't seem to understand what you're asking for. Earlier this week, I was commissioned to do some podcast artwork for somebody, and they needed their company logo to be on the podcast artwork. And when I asked them, I said, can you give me a vector copy of your logo? Because of the way the artwork was, a vector copy would have worked best. But they ended up supplying me a very low resolution PNG. Now, the PNG was transparent, which is what I was looking for, but the resolution was just way too low. Once I put it on the podcast artwork, it looked pixelized. It just didn't look right. So I asked the client, I says, no, I need a vector file. Can you give it to me in either an AI or an EPS file? And you can almost guess where this is going. Sure, I got an EPS file from the client, but all they had done was take the PNG, put it in some program, and resaved it as an EPS file. So again, useless. So I took it upon myself to find a good vector version of their logo. And I did this by going to their very well-established website. I actually opened up a browser window, and in the address bar, instead of just typing in their website, I typed in, and this is a Google search, by the way. You can do the same thing by going to Google. I typed in site, then I put in their domain name, then a space, then file type, all one word, PDF. And when I hit return, what this does is it's telling Google that you want to do a search, but only for that domain. And you want to do a search only for file types of PDF. So what was returned to me looked like regular Google search results, but every one of the results was actually a PDF file that sat on that website, my client's website. And then it was just a simple matter of right-clicking and opening each one of those PDF pages in a separate page or a separate browser tab. When you open up a PDF in a browser tab, you can see the PDF. So I was able to scroll through them and see, is the logo actually there? A couple of them didn't actually have the company logo on the PDF. It was just some other PDF they had on the site. A couple of them did have it, but once I zoomed in, I could tell that it was pixelized, so it wasn't a good version. But after going through a few of them, I found a PDF that actually had a very crisp version of the logo when I zoomed in. So then I downloaded that PDF, opened it up in Illustrator. In Illustrator, when you open up a PDF, it asks you what page do you want to open, and that logo was on page 1. So I said, open page 1. It opened up, and there it was, a vector version of the logo. So I was able to copy it out, paste it into a new document, and resave it as the client's logo. And the great thing was, whoever had created that had used the Pantone version of the logo. So now I had their brand colors as well. So I was able to reach out to my client and say, no need to look any further. I was able to track one down myself, and I'm now working on your artwork. So that is a trick that I've been using for years. Ever since Google's been around, you've been able to do this sort of thing. And once again, all it is you type in site, and then whatever website you want to search. And that tells Google only to search that website and not everywhere across the internet. And then you type file type, PDF. And it will only return search results that are PDF. Now, you can do the same thing if you want a JPEG file or a PNG or any other type of file. You can do the same thing. Or you can leave the file type out. If you want to search a domain for a certain thing, like for example, if you wanted to search value-based pricing on the Resourceful Designer website, you can do site, resourcefuldesigner.com space value-based pricing. And Google will return only results from Resourceful Designer that have the keywords value-based pricing in it. So that's an easy way to search a website if, for one, it doesn't have a search bar, or if you need to find a specific file type like a PDF. And I can't tell you how many times over the years this has saved me because I've been able to track down exactly the logo I need. So anyways, I hope this tip is useful to you. As I said, I've shared it before on the podcast, but it's worth mentioning it again. It's one of those things, whenever you need it, it comes in very handy. So that's this week's tip of the week. Now, one more thing before I get to the main topic. I'd like to ask you a favor. If you're enjoying Resourceful Designer, if you find this podcast useful, would you please let other designers know about it? So many designers have lost their job due to the COVID pandemic, closures or downsizing. Many of them are now, instead of looking for new jobs, deciding to give it a go on their own and start their own business, either part-time or full-time. Well, those people can really benefit from the topics and things that I discuss on this podcast. So if you know anybody that's in that situation, please let them know that this podcast is for them. Maybe share some of the stuff you've learned from listening and encourage them to give it a try. Just tell them to search for a Resourceful Designer wherever it is that they listen to audio, and they'll find me there. Thanks for your help. And now, stop trying to convince clients to hire you. Not long after leaving the print shop, where I had worked for 15 years, and I left in order to run my own design business full-time, well, not long after that, I remember having lunch with a fellow designer from my area. Now, at this time, I'd probably been on my own for maybe 6 months to a year, but my business was growing fast. Now, yes, I was lucky at the start. When I originally started my business, another part-time freelance designer in the area was getting out of the industry for medical reasons. And she asked me if I would want to take over her clients, which I graciously said yes. So I had clients from day one of starting my business. Not a lot of them, but I had a few to get going. But within those first 6 months to a year, I was making very good headway on acquiring my own new clients. Now, I don't want to say this to sound cocky or egocentric or anything, but the majority of the people who contacted me ended up hiring me. And to this day, I still win more clients than I lose. Now, back to this lunch I was having with this other designer. This guy was a very talented designer. I knew him through the print shop where he'd sometimes bring in projects to be printed for one of his clients, and it was always beautiful work. I used to just look and examine the stuff he brought in. It was so nice. Well, he had been running his design business for several years prior to me starting mine. And I remember when I was still at the print shop, just thinking that this guy is living the dream. Actually, he doesn't know this, but he was one of my inspirations for going out on my own. Well, during our lunch together, he mentioned how much he was struggling. He was finding it harder and harder to win new clients. He said that no matter how hard he tried to convince clients to work with him, only a small percentages ever did. In fact, during that conversation, I found out from him that many of my clients had actually approached him first before eventually hiring me. Of course, I didn't tell him that, but it was true. But what I also learned, which is the focus of today's podcast episode, is that he and I had two completely different approaches to acquiring new clients. You see, where he was trying very hard to win each new client, I, on the other hand, was trying hard not to lose them. And when you consider those two concepts, you'll realize that my way makes more sense. Let me ask you this. Which is easier, acquiring $100 or holding on to $100 you already have? I think you'll agree that it's much easier to hold on to $100 that you have than it is to try to acquire another $100. And that's the mentality I take when dealing with new clients. And that's what made me different from that other designer. He was doing his best to win each new client. I was doing my best not to lose them, because in my mind, I had already won them the moment they contacted me. Let me tell you a secret. Are you listening? You ready? Clients don't enjoy looking for a designer. In fact, clients would much rather be doing countless other things instead. So when a client emails you, calls you, or meets you in person, they are hoping that you are the right person for the job. They want you to be the solution to their problem. Think about it. No client will ever contact you hoping that you're not a good fit, that you're not the person for them. None of them are going to be saying, "Oh, I'm going to contact such and such a designer today about this new project, but I really hope they're the wrong person and that they waste my time." No. Every client who contacts you wants you to be the last designer they contact. And when you take that concept into consideration, it means you are starting off every new contact with a client in a position that the job is already yours because they want you to have that job. Your position from that point forward is not to convince the client to hire you, but to convince the client that there's no need to look for anyone else. And that completely changes the way you communicate with a client. Does that make sense? Let me repeat it. You are not trying to convince the client to hire you. You are trying to convince the client they've made the right choice in contacting you. It's how I've started every new client relationship since I started my business. As soon as we introduce ourselves to each other, in my mind, we're working together until one of us says otherwise. And if you approach each new contact with this mindset, you'll find yourself winning more clients than you lose. So, how does this all work in practice? Well, it's simple. You have to have the mindset that every time you speak with a potential client, that you are already working with them from the moment the conversation starts until you or they decide otherwise. So here are some pointers. Always, whenever you're forming your sentences, you're talking, always speak to the client as if you're already working together. Yes, I understand your situation. This is how we're going to tackle it. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to look at your competition to see what they're doing and figure out a way for you to stand out above them. Once I'm finished creating your new brand, you'll have a very strong foundation to solidify yourself in your market. Do you see the way I've structured those sentences? I'm not saying, if you hire me, we'll look at your competition, or I would love to create a new brand for you. No, I talk to the client as if they've already made that decision to hire me. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this for you. After all, as I said earlier, the client is hoping that you're a good fit for them before they even contact you. Show them that they were right. So when you're conversing with the client, take initiative, lead the conversation. This proves to them that you know what you are doing. Clients want a designer who shows initiative, someone who can take the lead, someone who can work independently and get the job done. Clients have enough on their plate already. They don't want to be dictating or micromanaging what you do. That's why they're looking for an expert to handle their project. Now, yes, we all know those people who do try to micromanage or to dictate everything you do. But in my experience, doing this for over 15 years, once you actually take the initiative and prove that you know what you're doing, most of those clients will be happy to back off and hand you the reins and let you run their project. And any client who doesn't, who still insists on micromanaging or dictating what you do, those clients are not worth working with to begin with. Remember I said you're working together until one of you decides otherwise? Well, if they're going to micromanage the entire thing, then you decide otherwise. So when you're talking to a client, even for the very first time, you have to listen very attentively to what they are saying. This, of course, shows that you care. It's all part of relationship building. Make sure you ask pertinent questions. This shows that you're interested. Show that you understand their situation. Show your willingness to help them. If you can, during the first conversation, try to identify their pain points, their problems. Try to do this as early as possible. If you can, and you point them out to the client, there's no way they're going to look elsewhere for a designer because you get them. And then offer solutions. Talk to the client with confidence and with understanding. They have a problem, and you are the person who will provide a solution. Now, another trick to prove that you know what you're doing is create a sense of urgency for the project. Now, this doesn't work on every project, but some of them it does. Because the more urgent a project is, the less time the client wants to spend finding a designer, and the better chance it is that they'll just hire you. Plus, as I said earlier, if you can show that you're on top of things, they'll trust you even more. So you create a sense of urgency by asking them first what is their deadline, and then backtracking from whatever their deadline is to now. So, for example, if a client tells you that they have a new product and they're looking for a designer to create a package for them, and they would like to launch this new product in 60 days, for example. Now, that's not a whole lot of time, but this is just an example. Okay, so you have 60 days. Well, the printer is going to need 2 weeks minimum to complete the printing of all that and fabrication. Preferably 3, that's what they're going to ask for. Plus, you'll probably need, let's say, a week for some sort of prototyping to make sure the boxes are going to fit properly and they're going to look good on a shelf and all that. So that's a little tight, but let's do it in a week. Then let's say 2 weeks to come up with the concepts and get designs approved. Again, 2 weeks on a project like this, not a lot of time, but it is doable. Add in, let's say, another week as a buffer because you know that emergencies can arise. Well, that right there is 7 weeks total. And the client says their deadline is in 8 weeks. That means this project needs to be started within the next 7 days if we want to meet that deadline. If you explain this to the client, show this sort of initiative and expertise, it just proves to them that they're making the right choice in hiring you. Now, of course, you can't do this with every project. I mean, some clients don't have a deadline in that. But the more you exhibit confidence and a take charge attitude, the more the client will appreciate you. Another way to assure the client that they've made the right choice by contacting you is by setting expectations right from the start. Let the client know how often you'll be updating them on your progress. How will you be communicating with them? Are you going to do weekly phone calls? Are you going to email a progress report? Is the client going to have access to some sort of portal using a CMS? Or what? Let them know. Clients don't like to be kept in the dark. So if you show them from the start what the process will be like, they'll be more confident that they've reached out to the right person. And then what does the whole process look like? Explain each stage from research to concept and design, right through to final approval and production if the project merits it. Remember, a client contacts you because they're hoping you are the right person for the job. Don't give them a reason to think otherwise. And 9 times out of 10, the project is yours. All of this to say, your attitude plays a huge role in whether or not a client decides to hire you. Now, let me repeat. The client wants you to be the right person. The client doesn't want to have to contact another designer. They want their project off of their plate and in the hands of an expert like you who will see it through. So if you keep all of this in mind and stop trying to convince clients that you're the right person that they should hire and go in with the mindset that they've already decided on you and showing them that they've made the right choice by reaching out, then they'll quickly realize that there's no reason for them to look elsewhere. And that's how you win more clients. Just stop trying to convince them to hire you. Now, I would love to know what you thought of this episode. Let me know. Leave a comment at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 250. And before I sign off, I just want to remind you that the Resourceful Designer community is now open again. If you want to join a great neighborhood, as Gabe put it, of fellow designers eager, willing, and able to help, then head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community and join today. And don't forget the tip of the week, an easy way to find logo files or other graphic files. Just do a search through Google by typing site, the domain name, space, file type, and then whatever you need, PDF, JPEG, whatever it is. And if you're lucky, one of the files there will have exactly what you need. So that's it for me. Wow, 250 episodes. That's a milestone. Oh well, now to start thinking about 251. Until next time, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business. And as I do all the time, I'd like to remind you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.